what's up, everyone, and welcome back to the End Zone Report. As always, I will be your host, Chris, and this is a show where we tackle the NFL. It's good to be back behind the mic after a long vacation in Mexico. I had a lot of fun down there. I was able to watch the divisional round games in Mexico. Believe it or not, in a Buffalo Wild Wings of all places down there. It was a really nice place, really nice establishment. Thank you to them for putting on the games. They had a really cool replica of Arrowhead Stadium. That was pretty cool. I'll post that on the social media pages so y'all can see that. There's a lot of Bills fans down there too. Some Broncos fans, some Seahawk fans, some Niner fans, but there was quite a bit of Bills fans down there, so it was cool to see all of that. It was a crazy divisional round. We got a lot of news and some injuries to catch up on since it's been a while since I have been behind the mic. So a lot of those coaching hires and fires and some of the other news that broke out, along with that big Bo Nix injury that happened in the divisional round game against the Buffalo Bills. As a Bronco fan, it hurts, but we will see what Jared Stidham, who will be coming in as the starter against the Patriots, will do tomorrow against them in that divisional round games, or the conference championship, excuse me. We'll see what happens there. Before we get into all that, though, a couple of reminders. You can watch the show every week at youtube.com. So that's the Enzo Report. You can also listen to the audio version on Spotify, as well as the video version now. You can watch the video versions on both YouTube and Spotify. So whichever platform you prefer to watch it on, go ahead and do that. You can also follow the social media pages as well. I post all the artwork from each and every episode. I did do a facelift, so all the graphics on today's episode have been updated and improved. So take a look at those as well. And all the breaking news that happens in the NFL also gets posted on those social media pages. Go ahead and follow those. All you have to do is search for the End Zone Report, and you will find it there on whichever social media platform you like to visit. So with that, let's get into all those news and injuries that have happened the last week and a half or so. So first up, we'll talk about two major injuries that have happened, and then we'll get into some news, and then we'll dive into all those coaching hires and fires. So Bo Nix, like I mentioned already, broke his ankle during their win against the Buffalo Bills in the divisional round. It is a season-ending injury. He will need surgery, so we will monitor that on the offseason and how he recovers from that. He is potentially set to start in the 2026 season, but his season is unfortunately over. Jared Stidham, the backup quarterback, will take the start against New England in the AFC Conference Championship. On the other side in the NFC, Zach Charbonnet, backup running back for the Seahawks, suffered a knee injury in that game against the 49ers. He will need season-ending surgery as well, as that is a torn ACL. We'll watch him closely as he recovers in the offseason. So that means Kenneth Walker will get the load of the work against the Rams in the NFC Conference Championship. Some other related news. We've got Adam Thielen retired from the NFL after 13 seasons. He did sign a one-day contract with the Minnesota Vikings, so he will retire as a Viking, which makes a lot of sense. He spent most of his career in Minnesota and has a lot of connections down there. Matt LaFleur has signed an extension with the Packers to remain as their head coach, so that seat is not up for grabs. It's a multi-year extension. I haven't seen any of the details yet, but they have him for the long run as of right now. Brian Flores has also signed an extension with the Minnesota Vikings to remain as their defensive coordinator. Now, this was kind of up in the air because there's a clause in there that if he does get a head coaching job somewhere, he can opt out of this extension. But with the Pittsburgh and the Miami spots and Baltimore spots now being hired on for their head coaches, it looks like he will remain in Minnesota as their defensive coordinator, which is great news. I think for both Flores and Minnesota, he had a lot of success there as the DC this past year, and it's really awesome to see him return for another year. Aaron Rodgers was originally not expected to return to the Steelers after Tomlin stepped down as head coach, But now with the Mike McCarthy hiring, maybe that could change. We will monitor that situation closely. I think a lot of people are speculating, including myself, that Mike McCarthy could have been hired to in a ploy to keep Rodgers there for one more year and try to get to that Super Bowl game. But we will see what happens in the next, few days to weeks on what they do with Aaron Rodgers. And then in college football, I wanted to bring this up because it has a draft implication here. The Indiana Hoosiers have won their first national title in the college sphere. Fernando Mendoza is the projected number one pick, which the Las Vegas Raiders do hold. So I think it's a really good shot that Fernando Mendoza does get drafted by the Las Vegas Raiders and becomes their starting quarterback. Now let's get into all those coaching fires and hires with this crazy carousel that we've gotten ourselves into. So John Harbaugh, who was let go by the Baltimore Ravens, has now signed a 5-year contract worth up to $100 million with the New York Giants as their new head coach. That's very exciting for Giants fans to have a very experienced and seasoned coach at their helm there. He'll, of course, be coaching, Cam Scadaboo when he returns, Jackson Dart, Malik Neighbors. We'll see how his recovery goes in the offseason. But this is a massive, massive hire for the Giants to get John Harbaugh there at head coach. He basically has full control over everything. It was part of his contract that he would have final say on every little thing in the organization. So he is king in New York. I already mentioned this, but Mike Tomlin has stepped down as the head coach of the Steelers. And with that, Mike McCarthy today was actually hired on as the new head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which I already mentioned as well. So the Steelers do have their head coach at least for next year. Kevin Stefanski, who was let go by the Cleveland Browns, signed with the Atlanta Falcons as their new head coach. So they have that seat taken now. Jeff Hafley, who was the former DC for the Green Bay Packers, has been hired on as the new head coach of the Miami Dolphins. So that seat is now taken. The biggest one to hit most recently was Sean McDermott was fired as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills after their loss to the Denver Broncos in the divisional round. It wasn't really that big of a shocker, but this is a massive, massive firing considering that he has done a lot to build up this team around Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen is reportedly in those interviews. He's a part of that interview process for the next head coach, which makes a lot of sense. Your franchise star MVP winning quarterback should be in those meetings and should have some say on the next head coach. So I think Daboll had an interview coming up for that spot. Mike McDaniel had an interview there. Joe Brady has an interview. They've been hiring a lot of people here for this head coaching job, so all eyes are on the Buffalo Bills. Robert Saleh, who was the DC for the San Francisco 49ers, has now been hired on as the new head coach for the Tennessee Titans. So we will see what he does with Cam Ward in that current state of the Titans team. With John Harbaugh leaving Baltimore, that left that seat open, but it has been filled with Jesse Minter, who will take on the head coaching job for the Baltimore Ravens. He is the former DC for the Los Angeles Chargers. He does have some experience with the Baltimore Ravens, so that hiring did make some sense. Mike McDaniel is expected to sign with the Chargers as their new offensive coordinator. Now he is one of the top candidates for the Las Vegas Raiders head coaching spot. So if he does not get a head coaching spot, he will sign that deal with the Chargers to become their offensive coordinator. So we will monitor that one for sure. Eric Bieniemy has signed on with the Chiefs to be their new offensive coordinator as he returns to Kansas City. He has been there once before. Tommy Reyes is expected to sign with the Falcons as their new offensive coordinator. So that seat is now taken. And then most recently, Bobby Slowick has been promoted as the new offensive coordinator for the Dolphins. So that seat is now filled as well. So those are the top current head coaching spots, offensive coordinators that have been filled. We're still looking to see who takes that head coaching job in Cleveland, in Las Vegas. So we will monitor those for sure. And then if any other crazy firings happen, there's still 4 teams left in contention for the Super Bowl. So we'll see if any firings happen within those 4 organizations. But we are still monitoring the Cleveland and Las Vegas ones with close eyes. So I think that pretty much wraps up today's news and injuries. Let's get into those 4 storylines coming out of the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. Like I did last week, this week storylines will be on the winners of the games during the divisional rounds. We only have 4 storylines this week as we whittle down to the last 2 teams going into the conference championship week. So the first one, the Broncos shock the Bills in overtime. The Broncos were able to defeat the Bills in overtime 33-30 on a controversial interception by the Denver Broncos on defense. Now, there was a lot of iffy calls in this game, especially one that really popped out to me was a no call on a holding in the end zone to give the Broncos a safety towards the end of that game and avoiding overtime. The officiating has been horrendous this year, and it seems to be seeping into the playoffs, which is really unfortunate because the playoffs need to be locked down tight when it comes to the officiating in these games. And it's unfortunate that not only did this game have a controversial interception call, the Rams game had the exact same play happen where they had the opposite calls being made by the reffing there. So it's very unfortunate. But, with the Broncos winning this game and now with that Bo Nix injury, it's really unfortunate. And a part of me, even though I am a diehard Broncos fan, if I would have known Bo Nix was going to be injured in this game, I would have really wished that Buffalo would have won this game because I think Buffalo could have beat New England in the AFC Championship to go on to the Super Bowl finally. But now that Denver has won and with Bo Nix out and Jarrett Stidham in there, I just have a really, really hard time seeing Denver get past New England and Mike Vrabel and what he has done with that team. But Jarrett Stidham has shocked people before when he was both with the Broncos and with the Raiders. A lot of people have been sharing that clip when his first start happened in the Raiders was he went 246 passing yards with 3 touchdowns and only 1 interception in that game. So, he has the juice and capability to win this game, but it's going to be very tough. The Denver Broncos defense is going to be the focal point of this team to get past New England. But New England has a really good defense and offense as well. So we'll see how Stidham it manages to handle this start in the AFC Championship. But the Broncos won. A win's a win. I'm glad that they have made it to the AFC Championship. In Bo Nix's second year in the NFL. So it's really promising for his NFL future. I am not the biggest fan of Sean Payton, but I know he will have some crazy plays planned up for Jarrett Stidham to take on Mike Vrabel's defense in New England. So, and it being in Denver is a big plus in Broncos column there. If this was in Foxborough, it'd be very, very difficult to win that game. But with it being in Denver, I think that's a huge plus in their column there. So we will monitor that for sure. And, of course, Josh Allen, it sucks that he can't seem to get into that big game, the Super Bowl. And now with Sean McDermott out, a new coach is coming in. I really, really hope it's Brian Daboll. I'm not the biggest Daboll fan either, but it makes the most sense to have Brian Daboll as the head coach of the Bills after, being the offensive coordinator that quote unquote fixed Josh Allen after his first 2 years. It feels like a complete full circle that Daboll would get the head coaching job while Josh Allen is still there. And I think that is what they need. And they also need a number 1 wide receiver because Shakir, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel is not getting it done. You have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox who have been okay tight ends, but your number one receiver cannot be Dawson Knox or James Cook. Now, granted, that probably helps, the 49ers with Christian McCaffrey being their number one target, but Josh Allen needs a stud at the wide receiver room. He needs a Jamar Chase. He needs a Justin Jefferson. He needs a Puka Nacua to be able to get over that hump into the big game. So as soon as they lock down their head coach, they have to focus on getting him a number one wide receiver. Now, whether that is in free agency or through the NFL draft, I think their opportunity to get over that hump would be in free agency. AJ Brown is going to be the hottest target for wide receivers if he does end up leaving Philadelphia, which there's a really good chance that he does with the confrontation that is going on within that organization with him. And I think Buffalo would have to just unload everything to get AJ Brown into this door. If they get AJ Brown to sign with Buffalo, that is the missing key to get them to the Super Bowl and potentially win Josh Allen his first Lombardi trophy. So the Bills have to get Josh Allen a number one wide receiver if they are going to be able to move on to the Super Bowl next year. The next storyline, the Seahawks throttle the Niners 41-6 in the divisional round. This was a massive beatdown by Sam Darnold and the Seahawks. The only points that the Niners were able to score at all was 2 field goals in quarter 2 of that game. Otherwise, the Seahawks just dominated this game. And it's really, really awesome to see Sam Darnold continue this momentum after a lot of people have, kind of ousted him as an NFL player. Minnesota ended up not re-signing him after last year with the incredible season that they had in 2024. And now a lot of people are wondering what would be the state of the Minnesota Vikings right now if they would have kept Sam Darnold another year. Now, I know he had a massive, massive price tag on him. I mean, his contract with the Seattle Seahawks is worth up to $100 million. So it's a hefty tag for Minnesota to do. But if he ends up getting into the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl this year, it will be a massive, massive overlooking moment for the Minnesota Vikings, and they are going to have to answer that big question as to why they did not keep him. But I don't think Seattle is going to be able to get past Sean McVay and that defense that he has built up over the years. I think this is where we actually see the Sam Darnold that we are familiar with, where he is quote unquote seeing ghosts and will fall flat on his face. I could be completely wrong because the Seattle defense is the number one defense in the league right now. But on the other end, the Rams are the number one offense in the league right now. So it's going to be a very, very awesome NFC West style NFC championship game. It's going to be great. And then the Niners, they've been dealing with injuries all year, but somehow Christian McCaffrey ended up being super healthy for the entire year. But they just completely fell apart here. I know George Kittle was out. Ricky Pearsall is just coming back from injury. Brock Purdy has been dealing with injuries himself. The offensive line has been broken. The defense has numerous injuries on it. So this Niners defense was set up to fail against this number one Seattle defense. And that is why I did not pick them to move on. I had Seattle winning this game pretty handily because of that defense and because of all the injuries on the Niners front. So we will monitor the Niners this offseason to see what kind of moves they make. It sounds like they do want to sign Juwan Jennings. Brandon Ayuk is pretty much out the building, so he will be not with this team. And they will need to get George Kittle healthy. They'll need to get Ricky Pearsall at 100%, and they'll need to maintain the health of Christian McCaffrey and Brock Purdy so that they can potentially repeat, a playoff run next year. This year with the 2026 season approaching. And they need to get healthy on defense as well with all those injuries. So it's unfortunate for Niners fans that this was a complete throttling by the Seattle Seahawks, especially with it being a big division rival matchup. But kudos to Sam Darnold. Kudos to Mac Donald, who came over from Baltimore to turn this team around. I know that Charbonnet injury is going to hurt them a lot, but Kenneth Walker has proven himself to be a lead back, and he will be the focal point of this run game going into the game against the Rams. So it's going to be a really, really interesting game. The next storyline here, we've got the May eliminates Stroud. The New England Patriots beat the Houston Texans 28-16 to move on to the AFC Championship. This was a pretty close game. Houston, at one point, had an opportunity to win this game, but they couldn't quite get it done. And then New England was able to wrap things up within the fourth quarter of this game. Stroud was struggling a lot with Nico Collins out. I knew that this would be, code red for the Houston Texans. They absolutely needed Nico in this game. If they would have had Nico, I think there would have been a really good chance that they would have ended up winning this game to move on to the AFC Championship. But with Nico out, that really limited their performance on offense. The defense did a pretty good job. I mean, they kept them to, 7-3 for a while in the quarter one, but then they let up 2 touchdowns. They didn't give up any points in the third quarter, which is good, which allowed them to potentially have a chance to win this game. But then they just kind of gave out and gave up another touchdown at towards the end of the game. So they just couldn't quite, hang with the New England Patriots. And it's kudos to Mike Vrabel for what he has done to turn this team around and being I think they're almost a Super Bowl favorite at this point, other than with the Rams. But yeah, I really like what I see here from Drake May. He's really become a elite like quarterback in the NFL, and we'll see what they do at the wide receiver room this offseason. Do they bring back Stephon Diggs? Do they kind of just repeat what they have with, Mario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Matt Collins, Hunter Henry is getting up there in age. So we'll see what they do in the offseason. Sounds like the running back room is pretty locked down with Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson. So nothing really should change in the running back room this offseason, but we'll see what they do there at weapons for Drake May in the future. But I'm really liking what Drake May is doing. It seems like it's between him and Matthew Stafford on who will get the MVP this year. I think Stafford has a slight lead over him, but I would love to see Drake May get an MVP in his second year with the New England Patriots. And then the last storyline we've got today, the Rams hold off the Bears in overtime, 20-17. The Bears had a chance to win this game and go on to the NFC Conference Championship, but they couldn't quite get it done. The Los Angeles Rams were able to score a field goal in overtime to win 20-17. I like what I'm seeing from the Bears. They kind of fell apart in this game, though. They just couldn't quite hold up with the Rams offense and defense that Sean McVay has built over the years. Stafford is playing at his best game, I think, of his career. And Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams being back is really good. Kyron Williams has been dominant on the ground. That crazy play with Caleb Williams where he launches that sucker in the end zone to Cole Kmet to send this sucker into overtime was really cool. But there's still some things that need to get adjusted. They need to stay healthy. They need to keep improving on Caleb Williams' skills and chipping away at his weaknesses. And they need to keep this team healthy. Ben Johnson has done a phenomenal job with this team, and I have nothing but praise for him, but they just couldn't quite get it done against the Rams in the divisional round. So we will have the Rams go up against the Seahawks and the Broncos going up the Patriots in the conference championship. So those are your 4 storylines coming out of the divisional round. We'll return to those storylines on the 2 games on Sunday. Let's head over to the fantasy corner for our top 5 wide receivers in this year's fantasy season. So this week we're going to go through the top 5 wide receivers. Last time we went over the top 5 quarterbacks. So if you want to check out those, check out last week's episode. But this week we will be focused on wide receivers. So at number 5, we've got George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. He had 287.9 fantasy points in the year. Really good year on his part. He tried to started to kind of slip there towards the end, the back half of the season, but he exploded that first half, and he won everybody who drafted him a lot of weeks there in fantasy. Bringing him on over from the Pittsburgh Steelers was great for the Dallas Cowboys, great for Dak Prescott. And then, of course, with that CeeDee Lamb injury, that kind of benefited for him, too, if you ended up having Pickens on your team. So really, really good year for George Pickens there in Dallas. Hopefully they sign him again and bring him back and kind of just improve that offensive line, improve that defense, and keep Dak healthy and going. So he will be a really, really high draft pick in next year's fantasy drafts if he does end up coming back with Dallas. So he is your number 5 wide receiver on the year, George Pickens. At number 4, we've got Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. He had 313.6 fantasy points on the year. Now, of course, he was dealing with the Joe Burrow injury, so he had to kind of rotate through quarterbacks with Browning and Flacco, but he managed to stay a pretty relevant wide receiver for your fantasy team. 1,400 yards on the year. He actually had less yards than George Pickens, but what really helped him was targets and his reception count. He had 125 receptions on the year versus George Pickens only had 93. Of course, that has to do with a lot with CeeDee Lamb being there. He ended up with 8 receiving touchdowns. George Pickens ended up with 9 receiving touchdowns. The targets were obviously up too for Jamar Chase, 185 versus George Pickens being 137. Oddly enough, though, Pickens had a better yard per reception rate. He had about 15 yards per catch, whereas Jamar Chase had about 11 yards per catch. Again, that is the Browning effect. Flacco really helped him, bounce back after the stretch there with Browning, but he is your wide receiver 4 on the year, Jamar Chase. At number 3, we've got Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. He had 323 fantasy points on the year. Not as a productive year as maybe some fantasy managers were hoping. The connection with him and Jared Goff seemed to be broken there for a stretch throughout the year, but he still had some solid numbers. He did reach 1,400 receiving yards. He had 11 receiving touchdowns on the year, which is the most out of these top 5, actually. He had 175 targets, so not as quite up there like Jamar Chase was, but he did have a better yards per reception rate. It was about 12 yards, and he did have 117 receptions, which, of course, having T. Higgins there, it does eat into that target share as well. So, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is your wide receiver 3 on the year. At number 2, who had an incredible year, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. He had 357.9 fantasy points on the year. He almost cracked 1,800 receiving yards on the year. He had 1,793. He did have 10 touchdowns on the year, which is awesome. He had 163 targets and then had 119 receptions, so just slightly better than Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had a really good yards per catch rate, which is about 15 yards of reception. Really, really good on his part. And his catch percentage was really good, too, at 73%. So he had a really, really massive year at Jackson Smith-Njigba. If you took the dart throw on him in fantasy drafts, you probably won your league or at least made it to your league championships this year in fantasy. And then number 1, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams is your wide receiver 1 on the year with 375 fantasy points. He got 1,715 receiving yards, so a massive year for him. 10 receiving touchdowns along with Jackson Smith-Njigba. He had 166 targets, which, of course, Devontae Adams coming in there did eat some of those target shares, but he did have 129 receptions, which is the most out of all these top 5 wide receivers. And his catch percentage was the best, too, at 77%, so good for him. Slightly below what JSN and George Pickens was, though, for yards per catch, and that was about 13 yards. But a massive year for Puka Nacua. If you had him on your fantasy team, you probably won your leagues this year, or at least again made it to your league championship. So those are your top 5 wide receivers on the year. Next time we will cover the top 5 running backs on the fantasy corner. So let's head over to the weekly preview while we do that playoff bracket update, and then we'll get into the conference championship picks. So the AFC side of my bracket is kind of a mess right now, with me taking Jacksonville to beat Buffalo in the wildcard round. Of course, Buffalo ended up winning that game, so it really messed up my bracket on the AFC side. But I ended up getting those games right. I just didn't get the opponents right. New England did win, and Denver Broncos did end up winning in the divisional round, so they will move on to the conference championship. So what I did predict. Now, I do have the Broncos beating New England in the conference championship to go on to the Super Bowl. Of course, that was me anticipating that Bo Nix would be playing in this game. And then I had the Broncos winning the Super Bowl, of course, against the Rams. But it really sucks that Bo Nix will not be playing this game, because I have a feeling that Jarrett Stidham won't get this done, and New England will end up going into the Super Bowl, which would completely annihilate this bracket on the AFC side. But good news on the NFC, I have gotten everything right so far on the NFC side of this bracket. Seattle ended up beating the Niners, and the Rams did beat the Bears. So I have those guys going into the NFC Conference Championship. And then I do have the Rams going into the Super Bowl against the Broncos. But I do have them losing the Super Bowl. So we'll see if I do get that right in the end with the NFC side. But we will return to this bracket after the conference championships next week. Now let's look into those 2 games for the conference championships. So we have let me pull up the odds here. So we have the Patriots and Broncos playing first on Sunday. I believe that is a 2:30 game. Let me double check that to be sure. Yes, 2 o'clock for the Patriots and Broncos game. And then now, of course, that's Central Time. And then Central Time, 5:30 p.m. for the Rams and Seahawks game. So the Patriots and Broncos first. New England is favored by 4.5, which is surprising, because I think either yesterday or the day before they were 5.5 point favorites. So something is going on there where they've got the Patriots a little less. So maybe Jarrett Stidham, they might have a chance, or maybe this just could be, a bunch of people betting on the Broncos side of the ball. So it kind of fluctuates these projections of the spread here. But the over-under is 42.5. Now, this pains my heart so much, but I am picking the New England Patriots to win this game against my Denver Broncos. Now, if Bo Nix was playing this game, I would for sure take the Broncos. But with Jarrett Stidham and what I've seen from him in the past, I just don't have much hope for this Broncos team to beat Mike Vrabel and what he's done with this Patriots team. So I'm taking the Patriots. This is the first time this year that I've not taken the Broncos to win a game. So this is going to hurt me a lot, but it's kind of bittersweet too. So if the Broncos end up winning this game and going to the Super Bowl, I will be super, super happy to get this pick wrong. But I have this feeling in my gut that Drake May will be going to the Super Bowl in his second year in the NFL. So that is my pick for the Broncos and Patriots. The Rams are headed to Seattle to take on Sam Darnold and the Seahawks. The Seahawks are favored at 2.5. No surprise there with them being the home team. And the over-under is 46.5. I am taking the Rams, like I said, to win this game. I think this is where Sam Darnold chokes, like he did last year in the playoffs. And Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford go to another Super Bowl together to face whoever it ends up being in the AFC side. So I am taking the Rams here to win, to go to the Super Bowl once again. So those are my picks for the conference championships coming up. Next week, we will have a really big Super Bowl pick coming up where I will give my pick, but I will also allowing people to come onto the show to give their picks as well, and a fun segment that I am calling Defend Your Pick. More of that towards the end of the episode today once we go through this week's bet. But we will have a fun segment next time on the show where we have people defend their bet, defend their pick on the Super Bowl winner of the Super Bowl 60. So a lot of fun coming up. Let's end the show with the Show Me the Money segment on the podcast today. So since I was in Mexico on vacation, I did not place a bet because I was out of the country, so I was not able to do so. And it was way too early to make a bet before I left for vacation, so I just did not do a bet that week. But the week before, if you listened to the episodes and saw the social media postings, I did win that bet of $97 off of a $5 bet. So super, super excited to go into this conference championship round with another bet. This is another $5 bet. This one is for a total of $180.50 if all of these can hit. So the first up, I've got Cooper Kupp getting the over on his receiving yards at 30.5. This was kind of a gimme by the Sleeper app where I do these bets. Also with Seattle, Kenneth Walker. I'm going the over on his receptions at 2.5 with Charbonnet now out. I think he can at least get 3 catches from Sam Darnold in this game, so I thought that was a pretty easy one as well. Ramondre Stevenson from the Patriots. I'm going with the over on him getting an anytime touchdown. Also with the Patriots, I'm going with their kicker, Borgales, I think is how you say it. I have never done a kicker on this bet, so I probably butchered your last name. I apologize there. I am going the over on his extra points at 2.5, so I think he'll at least kick 3 extra pointers. I think Drake May is going to start slinging this ball against that Denver defense, so he is good to at least get 3 touchdowns as a team, allowing the kicker to get 3 extra points. Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. I'm going the over on his passing touchdowns. It's only at 1.5. I know it's against the Seattle defense, but I think Stafford can at least throw for 2 touchdowns in this game. And then also with the Rams, I'm going with Colby Parkinson on a shoot for the moon pick here. I am betting that Parkinson will get a touchdown in this game. I was doing a lot of research, and it seems like there's a really, really good chance that Parkinson could get in the end zone in this game. So I'm going to take that bet and shoot for the moon. So that is my bet for this week. It's a $5 bet with the potential of winning $180. So that'll do it for the show today. Like I said, we are going to have a fun little pre-Super Bowl episode next week on the show, which will include the Defend Your Pick segment, which I will post on the social media pages as well. But you can call the show at 701-997-3942. Go ahead and leave a voicemail with your name and defend your pick for, a short amount of time. Keep it about, 10, 15, 20 seconds. We will put that on the episode for everybody to hear. You defend your pick. I will also be defending my pick on the podcast as well during that episode. So go ahead and submit your pick for the show at 701-997-3942. You can also, if you would like, film a little video of yourself. If you want to get some screen time on the podcast, you can submit those videos at the podcast email, the endzone report 2025@gmail.com. So go ahead and submit those videos if you would like to do a video call in for the show, or if you just want to do a voice call, go ahead and call that number. I will post this on social media as well, so you can reference to the email and to the phone number as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's something new that I haven't done on the podcast before, but I was able to get that phone number set up and for everybody to use. So go ahead and call in to the show for you to defend your Super Bowl 60 pick. Well, that's going to do it for today's show. Glad to be back recording again in the studio and looking forward to the conference championship games on Sunday. So with that, I'll see you all next time on the show. Stay safe out there, everybody, and have a good day.